So here we are. If I didn't feel, I was like, felt sad and excited this morning, and now I feel really excited, but also sad again because this is our last class of the Essentials, season 5. But here we are. Really quickly, we're just gonna go. I'm sure everyone who is here and tuned in has been with us going strong the whole weekend, and you could probably recite it with us, but Polly and I are just gonna one more time for the record talk about who we are, the essentials. The essentials, we know that. I am Danielle Viasana. I'm a community team member of the Everyday Projects, which is doing really awesome things through photography, like combating harmful misperceptions and stereotypes in the media, and one of the 3 grassroots photo organizations working together every year to make the essentials happen. And I'm here with the amazing Polly. I love you. Maybe I'll move to DC.
You're
Co-host
welcome.
Polly Arungu, who is the founder of Black Women Photographers.
Thank you, Danielle. This is one of our favorite projects that we do each year, truly. It's just, resources like this that help our members in both communities, all communities that join for this special weekend to really further their practice and open their ideas and fresh perspectives. I mean, I learned so much and I can't wait for this next class because I know I'm going to even learn a lot more that I'd never thought about. So thank you so much, Danielle. And again, thank you to Photo Wings to make sure that this programming that we do every year is made free and accessible to all of you from around the world. Photo Wings is a nonprofit organization dedicated to utilizing the power of photography to further deeper thinking, communication, and action. Their extensive online content and Photo Wings outreach programs have myriad educational applications and possibilities.
Yes, and thank you again to all of those working tirelessly behind scenes on the Everyday Projects team and Black Women Photographers. But we'll just give them a last little shout out here. Rebecca Gibeon, Austin Merrill, Peter DeCampo, thanks for being behind the scenes and making all of this happen and flow seamlessly. And if you haven't memorized it yet, these are our social media handles where you can stay tuned for many more amazing things that all these organizations do, but for the videos that will be available online in perpetuity as long as the internet exists in English, French, and Spanish. So share those videos. And final drum roll. Here we are. Wow. Oh my gosh. So let's take a deep breath. Everybody practice Corinne's deep breathing because y'all are in for an incredible treat. This is, I can't wait for this last class. I think it's going to just be the perfect cherry on the cake of a wonderful weekend. Look at me using metaphors. So for our very last class of this incredible series, we are so honored to have both of these geniuses in our presence, Andrea Wise and Stacy Kranitz, who will finish off this series on an incredibly high note by showing us how powerful storytelling is even more possible through collaborative efforts between photo editor and photographer. Together, Andrea, a photo editor at ProPublica, and Stacy, an independent documentary photographer, worked on a really, really intense story about a woman denied an abortion in Tennessee, which you can see. We'll drop the link in the chat. For more than 1 year. It is one of the most impactful stories I have ever seen. I remember reading like every single word, taking in every single photograph, just tears like streaming down my face. I mean, it was so intense. It's one of those stories that you see and you never forget. And, Stacy, when sharing the piece online, I was really moved by what you said about your experience with the project and with Andrea, such as it being the most in-depth editorial project I've ever worked on, and how all your gratitude goes to Andrea Wise for being the true visionary behind this project. And alternatively, Andrea, I can only imagine what it was like to work with Stacy. I mean, basically anyone who comes across Stacy or her work becomes instantly obsessed, me included. So, it's really such a treat to have you both here today to walk us through a side of storytelling that we don't often get to see or hear about. You know, the story's published, it's read, consumed, and then we move on. So it's really cool to be able to see how a photo editor and a photographer can work together to create such a phenomenal project, and what people in the audience can take away from that experience and incorporate into their own practice. So I've said a lot here already. And I know y'all are ready to hear from Andrea and Stacy, but just really quickly, I'm going to bullet point highlight their individual bios. So Andrea Wise, visual strategy editor at ProPublica, co-founder of Diversify Photo, past photo editor at National Geographic, Newsweek, BuzzFeed News, and The Intercept, among others. Juried for competitions like the Overseas Press Club and Getty Images, among many more. Stacy Kranitz, a 2020 Guggenheim Fellow. Let me say that again, Guggenheim Fellow, among way too many other awards and recognitions to name here. Assignment photographer for publications such as ProPublica, of course, Time, the New York Times, Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, and Mother Jones, among many others. And her first monograph was shortlisted for a Paris Photo Aperture First Photo Book Award. I mean, wow, we have angels in our presence. So thank you so much again for being here. We can't wait to hear from you both.
Oh my God, that introduction. Thank you. And Danielle and Polly, you two have been doing such an awesome job just emceeing this whole weekend. I've been sitting in on every single one of the sessions. And this has just been like a really, really cool season. So yeah, Stacy and I are super excited to talk to you all today. So I'll share my screen. So yeah, Stacy and I worked on this project the year after a denied abortion for a year. It is a story that started with an email from one of ProPublica's reporters, Kavitha Surana. Her beat is kind of reproductive health care. And you can see December 2022, she emailed me and a bunch of other people on my team to let us know about this woman who was 26 weeks into an extremely high-risk pregnancy. She'd been denied an abortion, and her doctors were aiming to deliver her in 2 weeks. And so we immediately, wanted to get Stacy Kranitz on assignment. And originally we were thinking that she will document the last 2 weeks of this pregnancy. And, we didn't know if she would survive. We didn't know if the baby would survive. We didn't know what was going to happen. And I highlight that just to say that like this ended up being a year-long commission, but it started as a 2-week assignment. And so you really never know where things can go. So we actually we had Stacy for about 3 months on assignment working with Kavitha, and we published a first story about Marin and her pregnancy. I should also say that this topic is like kind of sensitive, and some of these images are going to be difficult to look at. I should have said that before getting this picture up. So in March of 2023, we published this story that was really about Marin's pregnancy and about, her decision to try to seek an abortion, even though it violated her personal beliefs. She was personally against abortion, and also about her doctors and what her doctors went through in feeling really conflicted in not being able to deliver the medical care that they felt was necessary. And baby Elena, who was born, and I'm kind of flying through these stories just because we are going to primarily talk about what we learned and some of our takeaways about working together. But I do want to just give you some of that context. So that first story ended on this photograph, which was, we thought that the story was going to end the day that Elena came home from the hospital after spending more than 3 months in the NICU. But then 3 days before we published, Elena got a lung infection and had to be rushed back to the hospital. So we left readers on this like really intense kind of note of not knowing what was going to happen to this baby. And, we had gotten, our readers like really invested in this family, and people wanted to know what was going to happen. And so that is when we decided, let's stay with this family, let's stick with this story, let's keep Stacy on, and let's, plan to do a 1-year photo essay about the first year of Elena's life. And so that story, which again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's really beautifully designed. Anna Donlin and Alan Tan on ProPublica's team, and just a ton of other people work together on this piece. And it's really, I think the most ambitious photojournalism project that ProPublica has ever published. This is by no means like something that we do all the time, but I think it is like really worth your time. But I can't go through the whole thing right now. So that is the link again, and I think it's in the chat. So our very first takeaway, and then Stacy's gonna talk. I know I'm just like dominating. Stacy, do you want to say anything before I even like I just jumped into this?
I absolutely love that you are taking the lead, Andrea.
All right. So first takeaway from this project and from our collaboration is that I really believe that it is, and this, picks up on what Denise was talking about in the earlier session, that it is our job as photo editors to set photographers up for success. So that means, really thinking about what are their strengths, what are the challenges that might be involved in an assignment that you're, selecting them for, and how can you pick somebody who is not only like equipped to handle those challenges, but like who's really going to thrive in that environment, and who's going to then be able to like approach that assignment with confidence, with knowing that you are confident in them. So for this story, again, with that initial 2-week assignment, we didn't really know what was going to happen. So we knew that it was important to have somebody who is local to Tennessee, who would have some like schedule flexibility and be able to respond as things, changed. We knew we needed somebody who had, documentary, reportage, photography experience. So those like, photo skills themselves, somebody who was committed to non-judgmental portrayal of people with complicated lives. We selected Stacy before we had even like really met Mayron, but we knew that she had a history of substance use. We knew that she had, past history with the child welfare system. And we knew that, there was poverty involved and there would be class dynamics. And we really wanted somebody who was going to, not like overly aestheticize that either. And so I'm just sharing like some of the kind of things that were going through my mind as I was, it was a very easy decision to go with Stacy. And then also just like I had worked with her in the past, I knew that she was very communicative. She was really reliable. And those are also like really, really important things. Okay, so second takeaway is to really build and trust your team. Today we're talking about our collaboration, the two of us, but this is how many people were actually involved in this project, and every single one of them played an absolutely invaluable role. Like we could not have done this without, our Word colleagues. We had multiple, top Word editors, masthead editors, multiple people from the visual storytelling team, Boiselle Hosey, who's my boss, who Denise mentioned earlier too, who is supportive of this. And actually like, when we were pitching, we want to keep Stacy on for a year and we want to do this photo essay that is, also going to be like quite an investment of resources. It was really like our colleagues on the Word side who were also advocating for it, and that let us get there. Stacy, do you want to say anything about working together as a team?
No, I mean, I think that, well, we'll get to a few more details about that, but this was certainly the largest project that I was a part of. And I don't have a lot of experience with anyone beyond my photo editor and sometimes the reporter. So this was a really wonderful to see how everyone was working together to put this story into viewers' hands. I also really felt that I was getting a masterclass in investigative journalism because I got to see so much from that inside perspective.
Yeah, I should probably also mention for those of you, especially those of you outside the US who aren't familiar with ProPublica, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan investigative news outlet. So all of our reporting is about abuses of power, betrayals of the public trust. And so, you know, this story, we're going to talk more about this later, but this story was really about looking at the like long-term consequences of abortion bans. And when we were pitching continuing for a year, it wasn't just like, oh, this is great photography. We think there will be like beautiful images here, but it was really like we're seeing a lot of stories. You know, this was 2022, so Roe versus Wade had just been overturned. We were seeing abortion bans passed in a number of states, and we saw a lot of stories about the women and the mothers, and we were then wondering what comes next. So, you know, if somebody is denied an abortion and you know, in Marin's case, it's high risk. The baby's born extremely premature. That means that there's all these other complications. But even in kind of a normal, healthy pregnancy, what support are those states then providing those families to raise those children that, you know, that came about as a result of those bans? And so, yeah, another big takeaway, Stacy just mentioned it, is include photographers in the story development and editing process. It's obviously not always possible on, you know, a daily assignment or like, you know, these smaller scale things. But it was really critical for us on this for, you know, really in thinking about Stacy as like the subject matter expert, and for her to be able to, you know, be informing all of these discussions that we were having internally about how to frame the story and you know, just what we were doing, to have the person who is on the ground who actually is like reporting the story out in real time, informing those decisions. And then also just like Denise earlier talked about managing up, and part of what, you know, what we did is like we had monthly check-ins with everyone. So, you know, the audience team, the comms team, you know, our word friends, like literally every single, the designers, like everybody on our research reporter, like everybody on all the teams getting together once a month. And we did these, you know, updates, just to like remind people where things were at. And it was really important to me that Stacy be in those conversations and that everybody be, you know, getting to hear from her directly.
It was a really smart decision on Andrea's part. Obviously, they were very welcoming, but I don't know that a lot of photo editors think to do that. And I think it really, really made a huge, huge difference with this story.
So these images are roughly in chronological order, and we are kind of taking you through the story as we're talking, and hopefully like the takeaways that we're sharing with you, you know, they are things that were kind of related to what was happening. So like this image is from around the springtime. I think it was around March, when Elena had recovered from that lung infection and she was back home, but she needed a breathing machine to help her breathe still. She still, you know, needed this really intensive medical care. She was on a feeding tube. And, you know, that required a lot of time. You can't put a baby with those types of like really intense medical needs in, you know, your standard kind of child care situation. And, you know, Marin and her husband, Chris, couldn't afford, you know, couldn't afford childcare that could, you know, somebody to watch the baby who could handle those medical needs. And they didn't have paid parental leave, and they had to take time off of work in order to care for her. So all of those kinds of things were what we were really looking for. Stacy, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, you know, I often work with writers in very different capacities depending on the assignment. And in this case, I was working with a writer whose beat was, you know, abortion-related, the fall of Roe policies across the United States. And so she was really an expert in these issues. And because we came on the story together, I mean, she had worked really hard to find Maren, but she hadn't yet met her. So we met her together. And, you know, especially at the beginning when she was in the hospital, we had a lot of downtime. And I got to, she used me as like a sounding board. And I got to really listen to how she was thinking about trying to develop the story. And, you know, get these doctors in particular at the beginning to go on the record. And it was a really moving experience for me. And then that set a tone between Kavita and I, and Andrea. We spoke all the time because much later in the story, Kavita had to move on to work on other projects. And so they kind of left me alone to do a lot of the observational reporting. And then I would send those observations to Kavita, and she would actually interview me sometimes just to get those details right. And it was a really, really wonderful thing to play a small role in helping Kavita shape the text for the story.
In other words, Stacy was like a co-reporter on the project in addition to photographing. So this is our little like how it started moment, December 14th, 2022, just introducing the two of them by text. And this is how it's going now. And that's the three of us at Photoville. The work was exhibited at Photoville this summer. And yesterday when I texted Kavita and Stacy to just ask if it was all right to show this picture during this talk, Kavita wanted to make sure that we reminded all of you photographers here that you are also reporters. And she said photographers often get to go into spaces that the reporter doesn't, and they have their own relationship with the subject, and they witness or notice different things. That's what's so amazing about working with Stacy. And then she wanted to also elaborate. It's just so many times a good photojournalist elevates the reporting itself because they end up having a different access, maybe get invited to different spaces, hear different things, or just develop a level of intimacy that reveals other information. So again, just that collaboration was so critical in this story. So by this point, Elena, that's baby Elena there. She was, you know, getting stronger. She was doing pretty well. Maren and Chris, you know, Maren was back to work, and they, you know, they were kind of finding like some level of like stasis or like equilibrium in kind of a chaotic time in their life, but like, you know, kind of dreaming of the future. And I love this photograph so much of Chris and their other daughter, Zoe, just playing. And I love that Stacy was always looking for those moments. So as time went on,
You go, just go back. That's my favorite photo because it like collapses these three things. I spent so long trying to put a lot of different aspects of Maren's life into like an individual photo in case that we did have to edit a lot of things down. So in this case, I was able to get, you know, her caring for the children while also eating dinner and cleaning the house all in one image.
we ran that one full bleed. So another takeaway from this project is to really prioritize safety and set clear expectations with photographers, but be flexible. And I think this is especially the case if you are a photo editor working with freelance photographers. So around, I think this was like maybe June, in the like early summertime, Maren had a warrant out for her arrest for a prior criminal case involving her daughter, and things started to get a little bit more tense and a little bit less stable. And so it was really important for us to have a lot of conversations with Stacy about, you know, our expectations, like how our newsroom thought about ethics. You know, freelancers are often working with a lot of different clients, and no two publications are exactly alike. And I think it's really important to trust the photographer to make the best decisions in the field in the moment with all the information that they have. But I also never want a photographer to feel unsupported in that moment. And I want to have had enough conversations that you know, that she would know that, you know, even if she made maybe like not the right choice or not the choice that I would have preferred, that I'm going to have her back because I trusted her. And so yeah, so making a plan when, when there was, Stacy would share her location with me, and I would also, having a plan and setting those expectations, I was also talking to, top editors within the newsroom to make sure that the information I was giving Stacy about our expectations was correct, and just making sure that everyone was kind of clear and on the same page about things. So later in the spring, Marin's mother, who has her own mental health issues, moved in with the family. And so now Marin really was like the primary caretaker for multiple very small children, and also her mom. And it was just the stress. You could really tell that like the stress was starting.
And her dad.
And her dad was also living with her, yes. And
So 2 additional dependents, her parents, on top of these kids. Yeah.
And the bills were mounting. They were facing eviction almost constantly, and the tension was building within their relationship. And again, like I think part of what's like difficult with talking about a story like this is that, like, when we share it now, you kind of see it organized into like a narrative thread that has a beginning and a middle and an end. But like in real time, we had created kind of a conceit to know that like we're going to end this story at Elena's first birthday, and that's going to give us kind of a container. But like real people's lives don't unfold in that way. So like we didn't know, we could sense that like tension was building in the relationship. We could sense that Marin was struggling to cope with all of the pressure, but we just didn't know what was going to happen. So we had a lot of conversations. And that leads to the next one, which is communicate. And that communication, again, like, Marin was at this point, she had just taken a plea deal. And so she knew she was going to be drug tested. She was worried that the Delta 8 that she was used to using, which is a kind of, it's a legal substance that's like close to marijuana for folks outside the US who don't necessarily know. And so she was also expressing that she was worried that she might have to start relying more on alcohol for, coping with all of the stressors. And that was a little bit of a red flag, especially for somebody who, at that point had been, I think, like 3 or 4 years uh, sober from substance use disorder, and fighting with her dad because there's all these people in the house and just a lot going on. And Marin started having more breakdowns, and just the groceries that she had to deal with everyone. And and so with that, and she and Chris were fighting more. And so that communication, sometimes it was stuff like this. It's, me texting Stacy while she's out and kind of reminding her of the types of images that she should be looking for. And I share this also because this was November 18th. Elena's first birthday was going to be December 13th. So we're, just about a month away, and we're trying to figure out like, how does this story end? What's going on? We knew that Marin was drinking more. We also knew she was like so devoted to her children. So I was just encouraging Stacy to look for images that had some sense of finality, of, it seems like where this is going is that she's spiraling, and we don't know where that's going to end, but we know that she's clinging onto her babies for dear life. And then sometimes that communication looked, in the other way of Stacy just updating me, sending me some pictures in the field in the moment to kind of give me a sense of like, here's what's going on right now, here's what I'm seeing, which then, would lead me to make sure that I checked in on her when she was back home, to call her, see how she was doing. I think we had a couple of moments where I think it took like a little while for you to know that it was like okay to actually tell me if like things were getting really intense and it was getting to you. But I think that's, yeah, it just was important. And like, again, this was all on one day. I blacked out my husband there, but all the other calls were just Stacy and me back and forth, and Kavitha. And Sarah Matthews, who's one of ProPublica's attorneys, because we had a sticky situation involving the police where we needed our attorney to get on the phone with Stacy to give her advice about how to handle the police. So again, just like communicate, over communicate with everybody involved. And then it's also really important to be prioritizing consent throughout that process. So Stacy, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so obviously we had consent to do this story with Mayron. And she went through different phases of frustrations, with having me around. And we always dealt with those as they came up. But on top of that, there's this other layer that's really important to me. And I'm sure many of you who are photographers, I'm always looking for visual cues that indicate a fatigue with my presence. A lot of things in this story happened in the back bedroom, which was their most private space. And so I was always very cautious when I entered that room, and they became very comfortable with me moving into that space with them. But when I was in there, I always double check to just see how everyone was okay with my presence there in that very, intimate, vulnerable space. In this case, Chris went through a relapse, and it was Thanksgiving Day, and the whole family was there, and he was in the back room sleeping, and I just stayed in there. He woke up a few times. He saw me there. We spoke just briefly, and then he went back to sleep. But the babies woke up, and then and so I knew that he knew that I was there and was there with my camera. And I knew that he didn't complain. He hadn't made any verbal complaints. And by then I did feel like he was strong enough in our relationship to communicate directly with me. Although Mayron was much stronger vocally than Chris. So I did, I was extra careful to read his cues.
And then the other part of this is, as an investigative news outlet at ProPublica, we have a part of our process for any story that we publish is we send a no surprises letter to anybody who's in any of our stories. It doesn't matter if you're a lawmaker or, a regular citizen. And that process is about making sure that people know what we're going to be reporting about them and have a chance to either correct the record, tell us if, we have anything wrong that we need to correct before we publish, or just if they are uncomfortable about things. And so with Mayron, we were publishing, intending to publish these pretty intense moments. This was, she had been out all night and nobody knew where she was. She came back the next morning with the black eye and didn't remember how she got it. And so we wanted, we didn't want her to be surprised by any of the photographs that we published, even though she had, she had not expressed to Stacy that she was uncomfortable at any point in it. But what we did for the no surprises letter equivalent for this was we sent Stacy to go and have one last final conversation with Mayron the day before we published, and to go through the entire story and to talk about, we are going to be showing a picture of your black eye, and we're going to be talking about the drinking, and we're going to talk about Chris's relapse. And you talked about that with Chris, and like gave them a chance to express to us if they had any discomfort about that. And I think that's also part of just that continuing consent part of the process. Another takeaway is that our differences of perspectives is a strength. Like photographers, in order to do your job really well, you need to have like a really narrow eye for detail. Like you need to be like honing in on exactly what is going on in between those four corners. And that could also mean that sometimes you like lose the forest for the trees. And at the same time, like photo editors, we have to have this sort of wider, big picture perspective of like how all of these individual moments that we see in photographs fit together into the larger whole. And like, I think like really like recognizing that like that difference of perspective, like leaning on one another and trusting one another in that is so important. And then keep focused on the why. Like a project like this, a year, it is so easy to get like completely lost in like what's going on. Like, how do you decide which moments Stacy should be present for to photograph? Like when you're looking at, tens of thousands of photographs, like how do you decide which ones to publish? Like in what sequence? How do you make sense of these kinds of things? And so it all, kept coming back to like, why are we telling this story? Like we are telling this story because we want to show people the long-term consequences of abortion bans, and we want to look at the social safety net for the social safety net in states that call themselves pro-life. And so, we were really looking for like, what are like the moments in Marin and Chris's life that speak to decisions that lawmakers have made to either reinforce or weaken the state's social safety net. So things like decisions to vote against paid parental leave meant that Marin had to go back to doing physical labor, 10-hour days on her feet 3 weeks after she had major abdominal surgery and a hysterectomy, which is removing the uterus. That giant scar that you saw, that was like super fresh, and she was back on her feet. She had no time to rest because her state and country had no paid parental leave. So those were the types of things that like really guided us in what Stacy should be photographing, and also like what photographs to be choosing. It was like, this is not just about kind of like gazing at this family as they spiral. It is about like seeing how might they, what are the moments in their lives where they could be getting support if their state had chosen to give them support.
And I should say here that I was probably, I think just according to the hierarchy, the photographer is probably the most lost. I'm so deep in it that it is very hard. I easily just kind of just get sucked into whatever's going on. And I feel like it is the most important thing. And so I really had to rely on Andrea to help me kind of guide me back, because a lot of things that were going on in their lives weren't maybe directly, we couldn't directly trace to this, horrible experience they went through at the hospital. And so, and also we had initially thought that the story would be very much about Alina's health. But Alina turned out to have a really remarkable recovery for a 1.5-pound baby. And so it became more about the social safety net and these sorts of different things that they struggled with. And I would just run this huge list down to both Kavita and Andrea of all these different things. And they would be like, well, this is really important. And then they're like, but this is not that important for this story. It's not specific to the issues that we're looking at. And really and truly, there were so many times where I couldn't tell the difference because I was so deeply immersed in what was going on in this family's life.
And then the last takeaway that we want to leave you on is that you can never truly know what significance your stories will have. And so you really need to treat them with care. So we knew that we wanted this story to, and sorry, I might tear up, but we knew that we wanted this story to end, or we were intending for this story to end on Elena's first birthday, which was December 13th. And obviously tension had been building, for the last several months in the family. But, we did not anticipate that Marin was going to be arrested on Elena's first birthday, and she was going to miss Elena's birthday celebration. And so our story ended, on all this pressure then falling to Chris by himself to like still make a memorable birthday for his daughter. And at the time, like obviously this is we were super invested in this story, and that was just that's just how the story played out, and it's just what happened. And this is the story, the photograph that we ended the story on, of Elena smashing her cake and Mayron missing it because she was in jail. And Stacy, do you want to share what?
Yeah, so obviously that was in December. And one of the things that I really appreciated so much, well, one, the no surprises was a really moving thing for me. It was a very big deal because I knew no matter where this story went, there would be a moment where we would come back to Chris and Mayron and we would be able to sort of walk them through what they were going to end up seeing in the story. And that is like, you know, is a huge relief because then I feel like my trust, that the bond that I'm developing with them is not going to be betrayed by a media company. And if you are a photographer who's worked for, you know, any period of time, you know that that does happen. And it can, you know, you have very little power as a freelancer. So that was a really, really incredible thing. So I, after the, so I, and then part of that is that we had a delay from December to when we published because there was so much work to do in terms of the design and in terms of like we wrote it, we rewrote it. That's part of ProPublica's process, which was mind blowing. Was at the last minute they completely overhauled the story. It was a beautiful thing to witness, but also very intense. So I spent the next couple months. ProPublica paid me to go out and just keep up with Chris and Mayron in person, connect with them, keep connected to them. So I was doing that much less than I had before when we were still working on the story, but I was still going out there regularly. Then the story published, and I made a commitment to myself that I would continue to develop a relationship with Mayron and Chris. This was an intense year. I grew very fond of them and their family, and I wanted to continue this story as a personal project. So I started going out, and then about 2.5 weeks ago, so I go out maybe every other month now on my own. And so I was aware that Chris was really struggling with his addiction. The last time I went, you know, I photographed, there were some needles that he had in the bedroom that Mayron found, which was very upsetting to her because the kids lived there, and she showed them to me. And so I knew that things were not great. But I did get this call from Mayron and Chris's father, Ron, who I had also gotten close to, letting me know that Chris passed away from a drug overdose 2 weeks ago, which was clearly heartbreaking. But one of the first things that me and Mayron talked about was how, you know, Chris was a great father, but his kids won't remember that. But we have these photos of him being a great father during that entire year. And that is something that we never imagined would be meaningful in the way that I'm hoping it will be.
Yeah, like just looking back at the story now, you know, several months, I think it's been like more than 6 months after the story is published. I was looking back at it, just thinking like, well, what are the girls gonna think, you know, how, when they grow up and they look at this story and like what are they gonna think about their father based on this story? And like I hope that they really see, you know, on that last day, like Marin couldn't be there, and Chris just he was so committed to making sure that it was still a happy birthday, and I hope that that's how his daughters remember him. So yeah, you really never know what significance your stories take, so treat them with care. And with that, we can take some questions.
I mean, let's all just take a second just to, wow.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. And I didn't even know about that last part, Stacy. And like, thank you. This is just even more meaningful that you were still able to join us while grappling all of this. I am so, so sorry. Thank you so much. Using Corinne's exercise to like,
The box
wow,
breathing, inhale,
breathing. I just
hold,
can't.
exhale. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. As many people put in the chat, I mean, your vulnerability, honesty, transparency, walking us through this journey, this story, I mean, with real life implications. Thank you so much, both of you. Because I want to be mindful of time and there's so many powerful and thoughtful questions here. I'm just going to dive right in. But please, if you still need more of a second, either one of you, just let us know. we can always continue and pause wherever you need to. So just let us know when you want us to pause. This question here says, Andrea, as an editor, you provide the photographer all of the assignment instructions, or at some point, does the photographer take control? And Stacy, as a photographer, how much do you allow yourself to follow your guts and instincts?
It's a good question. And I think it depends assignment to assignment. There's definitely, I would say on like a typical assignment, which is not a year-long thing, it is more of like me kind of understanding what's going on and directing the photographer in that way. But on something like this, especially where, I live in New Jersey, I don't live in Tennessee, I'm not seeing what it was like. We had it was really like a dialogue of like, me kind of talking to Stacy about our budget and like how much time we could actually afford to give her to report, and then her also then informing and telling me like, hey, here's what I'm hearing is going on. Like, hey, I think that I really should be, I should go with them to church on Sunday, or, oh, nothing's going on. Oh, Marin's been arrested. I need more time. And so I think it really was like that kind of back and forth dialogue that was very much driven by Stacy informing us of like what she felt the story needed as well.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, I was getting lost quite a bit. I remember one moment, they weren't getting drugs from this guy, but he was someone that they were hanging out with, and he was a drug dealer. And I was like, well, I have to go to the drug dealer's house. And Andrea's like, well, actually, you don't. That's not part of the story. But you're thinking about like, how deep can I get into this, complex life that these people are living. And so also, I am an independent photographer who works on my own projects long term, and I'm not always used to having someone help me kind of see the bigger picture. So one, that was invaluable, but two, left on my own, I can make I'm like, go for the story, go as deep as you can. And sometimes that's not always the right thing. So Andrea sometimes pulled me a little bit out of my strange need to be everywhere at every moment and go as deep as possible.
Yeah, like we were telling a story about the social safety net after abortion. We did not need to see people using drugs and partying, and we didn't really want Stacy in those types of environments anyway. Even if she would make a different choice about that, if she was working on her own.
And that was an incredibly logical and reasonable thing. But my first instinct was like, of course, I'm just going to go wherever the story is going. But you don't need everything, especially when you are telling, a very specific part of someone's story. But I really have a hard time when I'm in it, which I think is, a good thing for the photographer to get a little lost and deep in there. I was like, oh, wow, if I had an editor on all my independent projects, it would be so much
I mean, that's what I was just going to ask as a quick follow-up to that. Like, the personal projects that you are doing outside of with the publication, would you then consider reaching out to hire an editor for that, or what would that look like?
I think that could be really good. I wouldn't have known that before. I think I always thought my independence. I think there's also like a certain amount of loneliness in making these decisions. You're talking to the subjects in the work to a certain degree about what you're thinking about and what you're doing, but you're having a ridiculous number of internal conversations with yourself, and you just get lost in all of that. So having someone even just to hear yourself and what you're saying, and reflect that back to you, it was, I mean, this, like I said, this was like a masterclass in learning things that I somehow, again, I didn't study journalism. I didn't have that formal training, as so many of us don't. And we don't need it, which is a really great thing. But it is nice to have these opportunities to get that. And that, was also the case with like listening to Kavita as she developed her part of the story, and also being in those meetings with these top editors as they like took all of me, Kavita, and Andrea's thinking and ideas and reshaped it again, which was a really thing.
I was getting lost in it too. Like, especially, I mean, we flew Stacy into New York and had Kavitha and Ziva, who was Kavitha's editor and like my kind of like project partner editor on it. And my boss Boiselle and Anna and Alan, the designers, like we all were in a room physically together for 2 days. And then did it again and did the same thing another weekend. So we spent like 4 days together, just all day, literally editing together. And then it wasn't working. And like Alex Zayas, if you're out there listening, she's one of our masthead editors. She came in with like fresh perspective and kind of like blew up our structure and like reworked it and made it work. And so that was, again, just like you can get too close. Also, just because I see one thing in the Q&A that I want to just make sure is very, very clear. We did not pay the family to participate in this. We have an absolute very hard non-negotiable rule that we do not pay sources for journalism. So just want to make sure that that's very clear.
Yeah, thank you for clearing that up. And we have a lot of questions, and I'm going to do my best. A lot of questions on a very similar thread, theme, topic. I'm going to do my absolute best to kind of group it all into one question. But there's a lot of curiosity and interest knowing more about the process of the no surprise letter and also how that relates to consent and that ongoing relationship of consent. So first question being, can you talk about a time when the no surprise letter has led to any disagreements? How did you navigate those discrepancies between how you envisioned a story versus how protagonists wanted to tell their story? And in that same line, kind of getting into the more nuts and bolts of the no surprise letter, are you showing them the images or the final edit before publication, or were you just telling them the subject matter? And then was there any situation where you came back to the family with the images that you both thought were important to include, and then they felt like maybe we would prefer a different representation, or how did you navigate that disconnect? So it's like, I guess the overall theme is like you take all of this care to really involve people in sort of the maybe not editorial decisions, but with the no surprise letter. So what happened? How did you navigate when maybe there were some challenges between like how the story was going to publish or how the images, were portraying people with, people maybe having different ideas? So is that okay? But summarizing like 10 questions.
No, I think.
Andrew, do you want to go?
I just want to give, so I think this context might be helpful because this type of project is not what ProPublica typically does. And so the no surprises process, if you think about like some of you may be familiar with our reporting on the Supreme Court. So like if we're reporting that Supreme Court justices have violated, have accepted gifts from billionaires, and that may cause a conflict of interest, then and those are not stories that I was like the reporter on, but like we would notify those Supreme Court justices that we are going to be reporting on this. And there are definitely times when like sources will tell us we have something wrong, or their opinion is that we have something wrong. And then, you put something in the story about, this is what their response is, or if factually you get something wrong, then like you correct it before you publish. So like typically the no surprises process is I think more with like relationships that are more antagonistic. But that was also part of like what we had to do is recognize that like Marin and her family are sort of victims of an abuse of power here, as opposed to the people in the position of power making decisions that impact other people. And so we were, that we were using the no surprises framework in this context, but no, we did not show the pictures before publishing. We don't give people the editorial decisions about what photographs to publish. Like those are retained entirely internally, but letting someone know, we are planning on reporting about how you had an affair with the neighbor. So she was aware of that. And, fortunately, we didn't actually have to deal with the situation of like Mayron saying, no, I don't want you to share that. She reinforced like on that last conversation, like this, I'm gonna not get the quote exactly right, but she told Stacy, like, you know, they basically forced me to have a child and then didn't help me with that child. And that really told us like, okay, we've like what we think this story is and what we have been crafting this narrative to say, like she is affirming that we have it right. So yeah, but Stacy, what were you gonna also add?
Well, I think it related to this idea that you had of like adapting that sort of like policy that ProPublica has. I remember we were in a meeting, we were trying to understand what that would look like for photos, because you guys had never done that with photos. It was much more important to do it with facts that you were revealing and different things that you were adding to the story, like you said, especially with people that you were writing about that didn't want to go on the record even, right? But in this case, the first, I remember someone being like, well, do we show them the photos? Like we hadn't even come across a scenario like this where we understood what No Surprises would look like for a photo driven story. And, you know, we had a discussion and everyone decided that because they don't show the text, they'll read aloud small segments of the text. And I got lucky. I had been there when Kavita was doing the No Surprises part with that initial story. So I watched her do it. And it's an uncomfortable thing, but it was also really beautiful to see this kind of, you know, just beautiful transparency. And so when it came time for me to do it, it was more about describing those images, like Andrea said. We had decided that it wasn't something that made sense because we don't show the text to show the actual photos.
So, Polly, I know we have a lot of other questions, but just to kind of piggyback and kind of segue, I mean, I would imagine, you know, on this topic of consent and all the care that ProPublica and both of you did throughout the process, I mean, can we talk a little bit about how building trust and how you build trust, Stacy, because you're the one out in, you know, out in the world photographing, interacting with people. So you've talked a lot about transparency, you've talked about rolling consent, but are there any, you've talked about, you know, kind of keeping yourself like quiet in certain spaces, but could you maybe just talk a little bit more about how, you know, you continue to build trust and how important that is to the relationship? And maybe if there were any times where, you know, you said how do you pronounce her name?
Mayron?
Marin, you said, you know, Marin was a little more vocal than Chris. So I wonder, like, was there any times where you kind of like had to, you know, like discuss things a little bit more in depth? So yeah, just you navigating, and it's not just this story. I mean, every person and story you photograph, there's such a depth of intimacy. So we would love to know more about, you know, how you develop and build and maintain that trust with people.
I mean, it was really clear up front that Chris is a much quieter person and probably not someone who would invite the media into his life. Then, you know, Mayron was the one that did that. It was her experience. And so he honored that. But I had to be really mindful. I knew that. And so I had to be really mindful of that. Later in the story, there was a lot of antagonism between Mayron and Chris. Their relationship was going through a lot of turmoil. I mean, you can only imagine what they had been through and the stressors. And, you know, Mayron often, you know, she has had this very intense history of being, you know, kind of abandoned by people, and her family, her parents, you know, she cares for them, they don't actually care for her. And so she is a very strong-willed, you know, kind of survivor mentality, and she would get paranoid that I was taking sides with Chris. And so I had to be extra careful about when I did occasionally end up communicating with them separately, because that just happened as I was working, that I didn't say anything that would in any way make Mayron feel as though we were ganging up on her or there was any kind of allegiance to anyone. And so I always kept that kind of conversation open with her. And also with Chris, you know, occasionally Chris would ask me to share like my opinion about something. And I had to explain that, like, you know, because Mayron is, you know, so sensitive to feeling ganged up on, like, I can't do that. And he was always very, you know, respectful of that. So there were like a lot of different things that, you know, I hadn't encountered before. And of course, being at that birthday party with Chris and the children and Mayron not being there, I felt really awful. And the only thing that made me feel better was like, well, at least I'm documenting it for her. But it was strange being free, like literally free because she was in jail, to have that experience and she couldn't.
You both have done a really great job at talking about like the delicate nature of balancing like empathy and sensitivity around this and their family. Somebody here asked, was there a point where you felt like you needed to take a step back, you know, during this process, and how did you? And then a technical aspect of her question, it looks like Stacy used some flash for some of your photos. Did that like break the routine or make them more aware that you were capturing their moment?
And they were they got very used to me. So one of the things that I do is I shoot a tremendous amount of photographs. So I'm always taking pictures. And I think that I had numbed them to the flash,
Andrea's
to every
face.
aspect of me by month 5 or 6. And what was so interesting is that by that time, that's when things got very difficult. And so by the time when they were fighting and physically fighting, when things got very, very, very caustic, they never broke their moment of antagonism to even recognize that I was there. But they clearly knew I was there because I was not hiding in a corner. I was close. I was very close during a lot of that fighting. I remember one of the things that I kept trying to explain to everyone at ProPublica was like, they're not just fighting a lot. They're yelling and screaming at each other for 12 hours, the whole 12 hours that I'm there. It was intense. And again, this was not the way it was for a majority of the story. It was when things got really bad and they escalated. And, you know, I grew up in like a violent home. So I was like, I'm fine. Like, I know this. Like, this is like an environment that I'm very familiar with. But I remember, you know, after 3 days of like nonstop fighting, you know, I went home and there was one day where I just couldn't move, you know, off my sofa. And all I wanted to do is like curl up and watch, I don't know, baby cartoons. I don't know, anything that would just allow me to feel a little numb from the intensity of that. And Andrea was smart enough to know that even though I was saying that I was fine, I was clearly not. And so she checked on me repeatedly that following day, just knowing that I was struggling.
Yeah, another highlight to, you know, the importance of the photo editor photographer relationship. I mean, definitely it seems like by just seeing the story and listening to you both, it's like that relationship too was so crucial to the success of the project. And it's really awesome to just hear you both talk about that. So we, you know, people are asking the question. So we've got another question that I think how do I say this? I'm like, Andrea, our experience with Photo Bill of Rights and thinking about informed consent is kind of like linked to that. But so back to the topic of consent and possible implications. Some people have some questions. For example, did you talk about possible implications for custody or involvement of social services? What did you do when you had concerns about welfare? Also, not sure if you covered, but oh, no, sorry, we answered that. Did you get advice from welfare organizations or NGOs about working with the family and how to best protect their interests, especially given their vulnerabilities? So would love to hear a little bit more about that, because our images can be so powerful. I mean, and maybe to round it off, maybe talk about like the impact that, you know, the exhibition has had and the story, you know, what kind of positive impact the story has had. But of course, we know all too well that sometimes our photographs can have consequences that maybe we didn't intend. So were those things that y'all thought about ahead of time?
Oh yeah. We had hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of conversations, including, all the way up to the editor-in-chief at ProPublica, including ProPublica's legal team, including
Emergency meetings. Emergency meetings.
emergency when specific things that we won't talk about now, happened. But what it came, so we did, I'll say this, like we did make a plan with Stacy, that if she was ever concerned about the kids' safety, that she would call one of the trusted adults. We knew that Chris's father, Ron, who lived nearby and who was very involved in their lives, like their day to day, that he, was a responsible, trusted adult. And, Stacy had a relationship with him. But we also decided that like our role in being there is not to be like an extension of law enforcement or to be like an extension of like the surveillance state, for lack of a better word. But we also, part of why it was important for us to have that no surprises process with Marin and Chris before publishing was like for them to be aware of what we were going to be reporting about their lives, because, we didn't, there, to the questioner's point, like there can be consequences that you're not, that you can't anticipate. But it's also so important in all of those discussions to like remember your purpose. Again, going back to your why are we there? Why are we in their lives? Like we are there, in this case, we are there as journalists. And that is a very different, or that can be a very different relationship, and that might inform different decisions than if you're there as an artist or if you're there, as an independent documentary photographer working under your own kind of set of ethical principles. But in this case, again, like we are journalists, we are investigative journalists, and that context, informed what we were doing. So we had safety plans for, Stacy's safety, but we also had safety plans for, if she had concerns about the children's safety. But it was also very important to not be intervening and to, I mean, how horrible would it be if this woman let us into her life for a year and then, what, we called the cops on her and had her kids taken away? Like that's not why we're there. So it's hard though. Like, and I think the other thing I would just stress is like, no one person, whether it's the photographer or the photo editor, should be making any of those decisions by themselves. Like that was not just like me being like, hey, Stacy, like, here's what I think your safety plan should be if you're worried about the kids' safety. It was like getting all of the brilliant, experienced minds, editors at ProPublica who have so much experience navigating the trickiest situations all together and making a decision collectively based on everyone's experience and best judgment, and the standards of the newsroom.
And that was hard for me because I was adamant that I was not going to do anything that would in any way bring DCS into their life. Like I wasn't going to be part of anything that would do that. But there were people at ProPublica that felt very concerned about these children, and rightfully so. But what was so interesting about the process was that they voiced those concerns openly. I voiced my concerns was that I don't want to participate in anything that involves DCS, in part because Mayrin herself has lost two of her kids. She's gone through a very intense trauma because of that she's still struggling with. And I did not want to be a part. But again, I'm there on the ground with her. So of course I see it differently than someone else who's working in an office and has, concern for children welfare. And so all of us talking together, I think, was this really beautiful thing for me to be a part of, because I could hear other people's perspectives. And at first I was really afraid. I was like, does that mean I have to do this? I have to call DCS? But that's not what they were doing. They were just talking out all of the different ideas and issues and things that could be done, then making a final decision about what should be done. And so that was great. And they always asked me how I felt. They always asked me what I was seeing. And so they always seemed to be very aware that I was the one person, especially after Kavita went on to have to work on other projects, that I was the one that had the deepest insight into the family because I was there.
And I think the second part of your question was about just like the audience response to the story. So yeah, I was like really, really nervous the night before the story published, because I just was like, I was just worried people would miss the whole point, that they would like focus on, you know, Maren and Chris's flaws, and, you know, they didn't always make the best choices in every single moment. And I worried that people would judge them for that. But like, Ziva kept telling me, like, we have to trust our readers. Like, our readers will get it. Like, trust your readers. Your readers are good. And I didn't I didn't really believe her, but I should have, because like readers really did get it, and it was, I mean, it had such overwhelming response. I mean, like, you know, page views and all of that, but also just like what's weird is like you can see like the numbers in the page analytics of like numbers of people who have come to the story, but like when page views don't tell you like how people are thinking about the story, but Instagram does and like Reddit does. And so like looking through the comments on Instagram when we shared the story was like totally wild, because there were, you know, there were comments that people made that indicated that they read every single word. So like people saying they only got $30 a month of disability for having a baby under, I think, born under 2 pounds. And it's like, that was not in a headline. I don't even recall if that was part of one of the slides on Instagram, but that was like an important fact in the story. And people saw how much they love this family, and they saw just how everyone has a breaking point eventually. And they saw that this family was pushed, you know, beyond theirs. And so, you know, separately, and again, like we do not pay people to participate in our journalism, and we have a very hard line, that we are journalists and not advocates. But Maren set up her own GoFundMe page, and after the story published, readers found that GoFundMe page and were sharing that link, you know, amongst themselves. And I think people sent in something like $40,000, which was really incredible because they were facing eviction in that moment. And I think that that money helped them, you know, pay the babysitter and, you know, secure some better housing. And like those are not like the things that are directly why, you know, why we were doing the story, but it was heartwarming to know that like that many people, you know, really connected and cared.
And they were sending comments directly to Mayron on that page. And so she had a chance to hear how her story, this story that she was very vulnerable to allow us into, tell, and she was trusting that people would respond, would connect, but she didn't know. And so she had this chance to have these direct encounters with people who were saying like, I see you, I see what you went through, and I am so sorry.
And people saying like, you're so strong, like keep fighting, you know, people saw her strength. That was really heartwarming.
Let me just say, as someone who, you know, had the privilege to see the in-person exhibition at Photoville in New York, I I was blown away. I mean, it literally, you just felt it there, which was, that could only tell me how much, I can't even imagine how you felt it actually being with them day to day, month to month. It literally left so many people like near tears or in tears after experiencing it. I know we are at time, but I do want to get to two last questions. I don't know, is my background noise too loud? I'm so sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
Okay, great. Okay, so the two last questions here. You talked about having the monthly check-ins. What kind of topics did you cover? What are some things people could take away from those conversations so that when we are out in the field, to keep in mind of what is needed to make impactful storytelling. And then lastly, Stacy, you mentioned of his heartbreaking passing. Do you see yourself continuing your personal project now after his passing, or where do you see this story going after this? Thank you.
Do you want to take the second one, Stacy?
Yeah. Well, it's strange. I had made this commitment that I wanted to, people laugh when I say this. I didn't even see that it was a crazy idea, but I had decided that I thought it would be really impactful to spend the next 18 years with Elena, and then she would be able to consent to her own participation in the story. And through that, I would have this really intimate story of these women coming of age. Much for me, a lot of the story is about the cycle of poverty. Mayrin is desperately trying to change the circumstances that she grew up in, and everything is, pushing against her ability to do that. And obviously, this is a story that, is happening all over America and the world. And so for me, I really want to be able to document this longer arc and see if Mayrin is able to do that for her children. And if she isn't able to, can her children find their way? Can we cycle out of poverty? Is that possible? Do we have the resources? Especially because in this particular situation, so many of those resources are related to the state, and that is my state. So I care so much. And now, of course, so when I was called and notified of what happened, I'm obviously running around like a mad person, like any freelancer, but I was lucky enough to have a couple days. And so I raced out there and I spent 2 days with the family and with Mayrin, and kind of documented as they went through some of these early kind of processes of like, making plans. That we went to the funeral home together, all of those things. And so I already had made this decision to continue the story, but of course, I just feel like now that Mayrin is a single parent, the story is now related to a whole new group of people. And so, yes, I'm continuing.
I'm sorry, before y'all talk about the takeaways from the check-ins, I just want to say, of course, Stacy's response would be like, oh, I'm going to cover it for like the rest of my life. Like, you're so amazing. And it's not just like, it just shows your heart, like your true like heart and authenticity in everything you do. So yeah, I had to throw that in there. But takeaways that we can all go into the field, follow your projects for 20 years.
No, but before I talk about like monthly check-ins, like truly the only reason why this story worked, like I don't think that this story, it's not to say that no other photographer could do this story, but like something really magical happens when you have like the right fit with someone. And like, remember, for an entire year, Stacy spent every holiday with this family. She spent so much time. I mean, she really likes, like in a lot of ways, put her own life on pause. When when we would find out that Mayrin was getting arrested again, like she would drop everything. There was one time when like I called up Tanner Curtis at the New York Times and asked him if he would like let Stacy reschedule an assignment because I needed her to go out because Mayrin was being arrested, and it was like a very big deal. And thank you, Tanner Curtis, for being amenable to that. But like, not every photographer, and I would not be able to do that. Like, I personally would not be able to like give that much of myself over to a story. I think that's part of why I'm an editor and why I'm not a photographer. And so I'm not trying to say that like every photographer has to, self-sacrifice everything, but like that is how Stacy works. And that is why this work is as intense and immersive and intimate as it is, because that is Stacy. Okay, and then with the monthly check-in, so Stacy and I were talking like every single day. We were not only checking in once a month. The monthly check-ins were, at the beginning of the year and kind of for the first like maybe 7 months of the year, those were like the monthly check-ins with everyone in the newsroom. So like our, our editor-in-chief and our managing editors and our director of audience strategy and our standards editor and and our audience, like I already mentioned audience, but yeah, like all of those different teams, the design team, like everyone getting together and just saying like, okay, here's where we left off last month. Here's what's happened in Marin's life in the last month. Like, here's where we're at with like wireframing design concepts and like typography. And, here's what we're thinking for like the interaction. And like, here's what we're, and it was like all those teams, because there's like a lot of work that was happening back in the newsroom because we were really like designing and developing and editing as we were going, like as the story was unfolding. So that was a time for everyone to get back together, sync up, share, talk. And I forget what the other question was related to the monthly check-ins.
No, I feel like you are really, yeah. I think that,
Okay.
Design
Yeah.
strategy was a really big one because we knew we wanted this to be an interactive project, but because ProPublica hadn't done one before, we knew the designers were really game. But in terms of what that would look like and the amount of work that they needed to be doing, and that is in addition to their full workload. So we were often kind of just negotiating those things, and they needed to get started, even though we were still kind of early in the project, just starting to think about what that might be. And so we were also doing a lot of those logistical things, right?
Yeah. And I mean, when we got closer to like the publication time, those meetings became once a week and then every day. So that's even like, okay, this draft has gone to this person, like, has this person read it? Have we gotten their feedback? Okay, the copy editors have been through. Okay, have we updated the captions in the CMS? Like, there's just like a lot of the kind of production logistical stuff that that's what really like those meetings were really about. Which is kind of a boring, non-inspiring note to end on.
Well, I think like what I'm hearing is,
Interesting.
like, yeah, like, I mean, I guess y'all already said it too, like just kind of continuously taking a look at like where the story is, like what else is needed or not needed. Like you don't have to go to the drug dealer's house, like kind of just having those check-ins. And so no, y'all have like gone above and beyond the answering. So
no,
you
I love what this person here commented. Learning about your process is incredibly helpful. Really appreciating hearing all these details about how the story was handled because, these are the things that we don't see when we see it shared online, right? I couldn't imagine all of this just off of your Instagram post. So this was just so enlightening, inspiring, impactful. What other words I can look up? No, seriously, this was just incredible. Somebody else said, thank you so much for the incredible transparency. And Cannon is here, so generous. I love how somebody shared earlier, like this felt like such a safe space. I mean, you guys truly made it that way with your vulnerability and just like somebody else said here, candidness, just open and honest. And it was so powerful. I'm going to definitely have to replay this because I feel like being on, it's like when you're a host, like, it's like, okay, you're listening, obviously, but I want to just like sit back and just like really, really soak it all up. This class and all the previous classes that we had this weekend. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea, Stacy. Y'all are just, I mean, wow. I just like pinch myself. Like we had Andrea and Stacy come and tell us how they did their magic. Like, and I know, it's so much the people too, but yeah, just thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insight with us. And I can't wait to see like what you do next, Stacy, what you do next, Andrea, what you do together. So yeah, just thank you so much. It was true privilege to have you both here with us today. So thank you. Thank you. Round of applause.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. And thank you to Photo Wings also for enabling this whole thing to come together. And you two have been such awesome hosts this whole weekend. And all of the sessions have been amazing. So I'm looking forward to like rewatching all of the other sessions too.
Yeah, I'm so impressed.
Oh, you guys are the best. And you already did our job for us. We're gonna say
I know that keeps happening. I think we need to
I
start
love
that
it. I
as like a
love
new
it.
tradition.
It's just sincerity. It's just sincerity.
No, seriously. This weekend, as Andrew mentioned, has been made possible by Photo Wings, an incredible organization that empowers and equips photo organizations like ours here to provide these free classes to all of you who tuned in all over the world with us this weekend. So shout out to you guys. I see y'all still dropping in the chat your kudos to our speakers. I mean, you guys were here rocking with us, whether it was morning or evening or whatever zone you are in. Thank you for joining with us all weekend, for your incredible, thoughtful questions, for your online engagement, and also letting others know that we bring this on every year. This was season 5, so don't worry. Well, hopefully we'll do it again next year. I think we will. I think 5 seasons in, I think we're just gonna keep it going by now. But if you missed if you missed any part of
We have to do the 18-year
yeah,
session with Stacy and Andrea. Like,
I
of
mean,
course.
I literally will need you guys back every year for something, seriously. But
Well, just a shout out. Oh, sorry, Polly.
Oh, yeah.
Just a shout out again to all of the speakers, Andrea, Stacy, all of the amazing folks you see up here. Just as a last little reminder of all the cool grassroots photo organizations working together to make this happen, the Everyday Projects, and Black women photographers, Polly, the founder, making the magic happen every day. Again, Photo Wings, thank you so much for everything. Like, huge round of applause for Photo Wings. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And broken record, but follow us on social media, bookmark, save the videos. Like Polly said, they're on our websites in English, French, and Spanish. And oh my gosh, I can't go further. It stopped clicking. That's it. That's the final slide.
That's why it's so important that this slide is here as the last one, because if you miss any part of these sessions this weekend, the recordings will be sent out to you all. So make sure you just check your inbox when they become available in the English, French, and Spanish, as well as you can already continue this amazing weekend of gems and replay the past 4 seasons. But after this, Danielle, the Everyday Projects team, we're going to be sending out a survey for y'all to, let us know what you liked. Maybe if there's something you didn't like, whatever you want to see us improve on, or what do you want to learn in season 6, right? What would you like?
Where do you want us to go on the road for?
Yes, or where would you like us to go or see or hear, or who do you want to hear from? Let us know in that survey. All feedback is welcome. And again, thank you. You guys could have been doing anything this weekend. You spent it with us. So thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
See y'all in season 6. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.